Welcome to this new session. Here I will talk about the identification of stakeholders and how they can influence your project. We look at 4 points. The first point is identifying the project stakeholders. The second is about analyzing the stakeholders. The third point is about the classification of the stakeholder. And the last point is about stakeholder engagement, the engagement grid, and the engagement levels of the stakeholders. First, stakeholder identification. But what is a stakeholder? A stakeholder is any person or organization that has an interest in the project. When you fail to identify all the stakeholders, you may get yourself into big problems. The project managers and the teams have to understand the stakeholders and they have to create a rapport with them. When you have items in common with stakeholders, it will improve the relationship and the way you communicate with them. Long time ago, I was a jury member on the Commission for Airline Pilots in Belgium, and one of the people I was working with from the aviation's administration was a person with whom I did not have a lot of contact, although it was important to deal with him and to resolve problems, but there was no contact between us except good morning, good evening, bye-bye, and such basic things. One day during an exam, we exchanged some small information about the exam, and I mentioned that I bought a new Nikon camera. What I didn't know is that the person himself was a driven photo amateur. He had been doing photography for many years, making his own glass plates, working on pictures in Africa, and from that moment on, we started communicating in a completely different level. It is important to understand these little things about project managers and stakeholders. When you have things in common, the relationship is always easier. Another very important element related to stakeholders is their power position. Are they interested in the project? What is their power? How can they influence your project in a positive or in a negative way? Let's have a look at the different steps you have to follow to analyze the stakeholders. First of all, it is important to identify relevant information about the stakeholders. The more you know about the stakeholders, the better you can manage them or evaluate how important they are. What is their preferred way of communication? How do they communicate with other people? Some people like stories, some people are to the point. You have to understand how to address the stakeholders and how to pass on the messages you have to send them. How are those stakeholders situated in their organization? What is their level? To whom they report to? Who are the people that report to them? Another element to identify is what we call a fox in an organization. A fox is a person who is not necessarily very important in the organization, but is an ally who can support you and who has influence on the important stakeholders. Stakeholders have to be evaluated or analyzed about the potential impact they can have on your project and what are the possible reactions they have or can have according to the situations that may occur. So let's continue with the classification of stakeholders. Now, stakeholders before the PMBOK version 4 was integrated in other knowledge areas. PMI and the project management community acknowledged that managing stakeholders is very important, and every project starts with the identification of the project stakeholders. It is only a high-level evaluation because once we start working on the project management plan, we will identify more stakeholders. When you identify stakeholders, it is very important to understand their position related to the project. Are they in favor? Are they opposed to the project, or are they neutral? You have to find out what stakeholders are more important than others. And you have to adjust their involvement in case it is necessary. A very important tool is what we call the power interest grid. The grid is linking power and interest. And in the horizontal axis, we identify the interest of the stakeholders. In the vertical axis, we have the power of the stakeholders. From left to right on the horizontal axis, interest increases. On the vertical axis, power increases from the bottom to the top. Now, when we look at those grids, we can identify 4 quadrants. When we have people with a high interest and high power, those are the people we have to manage closely. Those are typically what we would call the promoters. It is very important that these people are in favor of the project. High interest and low power, these people we have to keep informed. We call them defenders. People with low interest but high power are the latents, and we have to keep these people satisfied. Low interest and low power, we have to monitor those people, and we call them the apathetics. It is important to evaluate stakeholders during the ongoing project because their power or interest can change. There are other grids that can be determined or defined, which is the power and influence grid or the influence and impact grid. The results would be similar, but there are different ways to classify stakeholders. Another element is the salience model. The salience model relates to 3 parameters. First parameter is the power. The power is the ability to influence the outcome of the deliverables. The second parameter is the urgency, or the time expected for responses. And the legitimacy is the authority, level of involvement the stakeholder has on the project. This is typically represented in a Venn diagram. And we put the people in the different places, and then we identify how important those people are. But let's have a look at that closer on the next slide. Let's have a look at the salience model and look at the classification of the stakeholders. Here we have a detail of the different intersection areas, and we have to classify the stakeholders depending on their position. First, the core. The core combines power, urgency, and legitimacy, and it is clear that this is the highest level of influence to be given to stakeholders. The second step is the dominant. Dominant is the combination of power and legitimacy. Then we have the dangerous stakeholders, where they are characterized by power and urgency. There are the dependent stakeholders, when there is urgency and dependency. There are the latent stakeholders, who are in fact reacting when something is wrong. You don't hear about them, but suddenly something is going wrong, and then they are there with all kinds of comments and questions. There are the demanding stakeholders, typically people who think they are important, they want to be known, but in many cases they are not really the people that you have to take care of. Discretionary stakeholders are the people you have to keep happy. And finally, there is the group of non-stakeholders, people who are not really involved in the project at this moment, but they can be involved later when situations may change. This is the Salience model. It's also added in the PMBOK from version 5. When we look at stakeholders, we also can consider their engagement levels. And there are 5 engagement levels that the PMBOK defines. Unaware, the person doesn't know about the project and the possible impacts. Resistant, they are aware and they resist. The project can be dangerous. You have to be aware that these people can have an important influence. Neutral, well, they know there is a project going on, but they don't really care, they don't support you, they are not resistant. Supportive, they are aware and they are supportive to the change that your project is bringing. And then leading, then you see the stakeholders that are aware and that are actively engaged. These are the people that will help your project. Now you have to identify what is the engagement level of the stakeholders at this moment and what is the desired engagement level. It may be that you don't care about certain people, that you have to keep them neutral. Some people may be resistant and you want them to be neutral or supportive or even leading. So now you have to make a system how you identify first what is the actual engagement level of the stakeholder and what is the desired engagement level. Where do you want the stakeholder to be? Let's have a look at the engagement level matrix. The engagement level matrix is in fact a matrix representation of the stakeholders and their level of engagement. Let's have a look at Radovan. Actual means that is actual situation. D is the desired situation, where you want Radovan to be. At this moment, Radovan is supportive, but you want him to be leading. And the same for all the others. Hannah is supportive, but you want her to be leading. Radomil is unaware, you want him to be neutral, and Erika is unaware and you want her to be supportive. So, very important in project, stakeholder management, how to work with it, how to identify the stakeholders. Let the stakeholders be a part of your success. When you manage them properly, they can help you save your project. If you manage them badly, be sure they will destroy the project. So, a long session, very important. See you again. You're doing a great job. Thank you.